Freilich and Chanukah, everyone, and welcome back to our virtual Mishnah Berurah share. I'm happy, Baruch Hashem, I'm finally getting to sit down and record this share. I did not want another day to go by missing a share, especially on Chanukah, to have the schus of limud HaTorah on Chanukah. Chanukah is known as the Yom Tov of Torah Shabbal Peh. Yom Tov is complete. Chanukah is completely a Yom Tov d'Rabbanan. We celebrate Torah. We celebrate Torah Shabbal Peh. We celebrate the Or of the Menorah, which is the Or Shel Torah. It's brought down that as long as we had a Menorah in the Beis Hamikdash and we had the Or of the Neros in the Beis Hamikdash, it was easier to learn Pshat in a Tosfos. Kiner mitzvah the Torah Or, the hashpah of the Menorah, the hashpah of the Or of the Menorah, made it easier for us to learn Pshat in a Shver Tosfos. The same way the Shulchan had a hashpah of Parnasa. So it was easier to have for Yidden to have Parnasa. Kol Zman we had a Beis Hamikdash and we had a Shulchan. The same way, I always say, as long as we had a Beis Hamikdash with an Aron HaKodesh, it was easier for people to withstand the challenges of the Yetzer Hara. Why is that? Very simple. Chazal tell us that the Aron HaKodesh is Eina Min Hamida. If you went into the Kachay Kachim and you took your trusty tape measure and you measured from one side wall of the Kachay Kachim to the side of the Aron, and then you went to the other side of the Aron and you measured from the other side of the Aron to the opposite wall, and you took those two measurements and you added them together, you got the total width of the Kachay Kachim. And yet, the Aron HaKodesh was in between. So the Aron HaKodesh Eina Min Hamida. The Aron HaKodesh did not take up any physical space. How is it possible that the Aron HaKodesh did take up physical space? Certainly that's a tremendous nace. But what you have to understand about that is that the Aron HaKodesh is a fascinating object. The Aron HaKodesh contained the luchos. The luchos shniyos were Maaseh Adam. They were made by Moshe Rabbeinu. Psal lecha shnei luchos avanim karishonim. The Rebbeinu Shalom told Moshe Rabbeinu. The Rebbeinu Shalom instructed Moshe Rabbeinu to go cut two stones, the same as the two stones of the original luchos. But the original luchos were Maaseh Elokim Hema. The original luchos were crafted by the Rebbeinu Shalom. The second luchos were crafted by Moshe Rabbeinu. The ksav, the Moshe Rabbeinu took those luchos that he crafted, he brought them up to Shamayim, and the ksav on the luchos was Michtav Elokimhu. So you had Michtav Elokim Chorus al Haluchos. You had the writing of the Rebbeinu Shalom Kaviyachol that was engraved onto stones that were crafted by Moshe Rabbeinu. So you had the stones that were a Dvar Gashmi. You had the stones crafted on this earth by Moshe Rabbeinu, a Dvar Gashmi, and then you had the Michtav Elokim Charas Alaluchos. You had the Ruchni, which was the Ksiva, the Ksav, the Michtav Elokim that was Charas Al Haluchos. So the Luchos were this combination of Gashmi and Ruchni that were contained within the Aron HaKodesh. Where else do you have this combination of Gashmi and Ruchni? You're looking at it. A mensch. A mensch is the same combination of Gashmi and Ruchni. A mensch, Adam min ha'adama. The Rebbeinu Shalom fashioned Adam min ha'adama, vayipach ba'apav nishmas rachayim. And then the Rebbeinu Shalom blew in to this Adam. He blew in a chelik elikim mimal. The Rebbeinu Shalom blew in a neshama. The Rebbeinu Shalom blew in Ruchni. So you have this combination of Gashmi and Ruchni. And whenever you have this combination of Gashmi and Ruchni, you have the great struggle, the great Milchama that the Mesilas Yesharim speaks about, which is the Milchama that we are constantly in. The Milchama between Gashmi and Ruchni, the Milchama between the Yetzer Hara, the Yetzer Tov, Ki Yetzer Leva Adam Ram and Urav. That's the challenge that we have. Kol Zman we had a Beis Hamikdash, and we had those luchos in the Aron HaKodesh, in the Kachay Kachim. The hashpah of those luchos assisted us in that milchama. Once we lost it, we don't have that help. We still get help from the Rebbeinu Shalom, like this Musa Sfarim say, without help from the Rabbanan Shalom, it would be impossible for a person to be kovish his yetzer. But the Rabbanan Shalom tells us, you should open up for me Pischa Shel Machat. If you open up for me a small opening the size of the eye of a needle, then the Rabbanan Shalom opens up for you Ki Pischa Shel Ulam. The Rabbanan Shalom opens up for you an opening the size of the Ulam, the entranceway into the Heichal of the Beis Hamikdash. The Rabbanan Shalom is always there to help us out. So it's a beautiful thing to be able to sit down and record a shiur and have Talmud Torah Barabim on Chanukah. So even if this shiur will be a little bit abbreviated, at least we'll get the shiur in. So we're continuing to learn Hilchas Pesias HaPas. We are going to continue discussing the very complex sugya of Pas Haba Bekisnin. We pick up today on Samach Zayin Amud Aleph, Hilchas Pesias HaPas, Siman Kuf Samach Ches, Siv Zayin, 4 lines down from the top of Samach Zayin Amud Aleph. And today what we're going to be discussing in the Mechaber and in the Ramah is how to identify Pas Haba Bekisnin. What makes something Pas Haba Bekisnin? As we've been discussing Pas Haba Bekisnin, we keep on pointing out how Pas Haba Bekisnin has all of the essential requirements of bread. In many ways, it is bread, yet it has a different halacha than bread. On real bread, on Pas Gomor, you make a bracha hamoitzi lechem in the aretz, even on a kol shehu, even on a minute amount of bread. The bracha rishona is hamoitzi, and the bracha achrona on a kazayis of Pas Gomor is, of course, Birkas Hamazon. According to many shittas, the only bracha midaraisa is the bracha, the first bracha at least, of Birkas Hamazon. Yet, by Pas Haba Bekisnin, the default bracha rishayna is Barei Minim Zaynais, and the default bracha achrayna is bracha achas me'ein shalosh, the bracha of Al Hamichya. So how is it that Pas Haba Bekisnin gets a different din of Pas Gomor? What exactly identifies? What are the identifying features of Pas Haba Bekisnin? Says the Mechaber, Siman Kuf Samach Ches Siv Zayin. Pas Haba Bekisnin. When it comes to Pas Haba Bekisnin, we're going to have over here 3 different opinions. Yesh Mefarshim, there are those that explain, and if you take a look at the Be'er HaGoylah, this is brought down in the name of Rabbeinu Chananel, the Aruch, the Torah, the Rashba. Pas Haba Bekisnin, Yesh Mefarshim, there are those that explain, Pas Sha'osui Kimin Kisim. This is bread that is formed into a pocket, where we then fill this dough pocket with dvash, honey, sukar or sugar, vegoizim or walnuts, ushkedim or almonds, vetavlin or other flavorings and spices, veheim hanikroim rishkulish or rialachshu. I don't even know how to pronounce these words. I don't know what they are, but obviously those were words that were extant, depending on how you want to pronounce it, at the time of the Mechaber. So the first opinion that the Mechaber brings down over here is, he says, what are Pas Haba Bekisnin? Pas Haba Bekisnin is some kind of a pastry where the dough is formed into a pocket, and the pocket is filled, a potato knish. So you have a potato kiddush, a potato baraka. They used to be very common by the simchas where they would make a liver baraka or a beef baraka. Now I think pulled beef is more in vogue. So again, all of these things are a pocket of dough, and they're filled. Now, it happens to be that the fillings that the Mechaber speaks about here are mainly sweets, honey, sugar, different types of nuts, walnuts, almonds, but it doesn't have to be sweets. It could be minei peiros, it could be spices, it could be meat, it could be vegetables, but it is a dough that's formed into a pocket, and it has a filling. That is the first shot that we have over here in Pas Haba Bekisnin. Now, as we go through identifying Pas Haba Bekisnin, we're going to have to look at each description of Pas Haba Bekisnin and analyze, okay, so if that's Pas Haba Bekisnin, why does that make that the bracha rishayna is mezainos as opposed to amoitzi, and the bracha achrayna is bracha achas me'ein shalosh as opposed to birkas hamazon? So let's take a look at this first pshat. So we have over here, this first pshat is, it's a dough, that's a pocket, and it has a filling. Says the Mishnah Berurah, Ois Cotton Chav Zayin. Shememalin Oisan, where you fill up this dough pocket, Ritzoino Loimar. The Chavetz Chaim, Kedarko B'Kodesh, is going to break this down to us into its essential features in a very clear, concise way. Says the Chavetz Chaim, Ritzoino Loimar. What the Mechaber wants to say by presenting Pasabah B'Kistin in this way is, Af im nilusha mitchila b'mayim kishar pas, even though the dough that we're talking about is bona fide lechem. It's a dough that is flour and water kneaded together. There is nothing essentially different about this dough. This dough is a pas dough. That's not the ingredient over here, if you will. The variable that is turning this into Pasabah B'Kisnin is not the makeup of the dough. The Mechaber says, what makes it Pasabah B'Kisnin? What makes it Pasabah B'Kisnin is that it's dough formed into a pocket and it has a filling. So it's very clear from the Mechaber that the variable, the feature of this food that is changing it from pas, gomer, to Pasabah B'Kisnin is not the makeup of the dough. The dough is a regular dough. It's flour and water. The variable that's changing it into Pasabah B'Kisnin is that you formed it into a pocket and you put in a filling. That's what's changing it. So that's why the Chavetz Chaim says over here, it's Tzayna Loimar, what the Mechaber wants to say, if you read between the lines, is, Afim nilusha metchila b'mayim kishar pas, even if you kneaded this dough from the outset in the perfectly normal way of pas gomer, it's flour and water, but kevan shekala isa memula miminim elu, since the entire dough was formed into a pocket and then you filled it with a filling, that's what makes it Pasabah B'Kisnin. Now the Chavetz Chaim kind of turns around and says, okay, so wait a second. Now you might have a kasha. What I'm telling you over here is you made a perfectly normal dough. But since you turned it into a pocket and you filled it with blueberry pie filling, or you filled it with mashed potatoes, now suddenly it ceased to be pas gomer and it became Pasabah B'Kisnin. Now, you might have a kasha. It sounds like what we're dealing with over here is kind of like Iker and Tuffle. It sounds like what I'm telling you is, even though you have what is essentially pas gomer, since you filled it with a filling, it loses the pas status. Well, wait a second. Maybe if it loses the pas status, it shouldn't even be a mezainis. You're telling me that because I made the dough into a pocket and I filled it with potato kiddush filling, now it ceases to be hamaitzi and it becomes mezainis. It gets downgraded to mezainis. Maybe we should downgrade it even further. Maybe we should downgrade it to a ha'adama. The potato filling is a ha'adama. So why don't we downgrade it to ha'adama and say that we turned it into a potato kiddush? That word doesn't have dough in it anywhere. So maybe we should just downgrade it to a potato food. And maybe we should say it's ha'adama. So says the Chavetz Chaim, no. Va'afta milui iker etzloi, even though you're right that there is a lumdus of Iker and Tuffle at work over here. Since we took the dough and we filled it with the potato kiddush filling, it does downgrade the dough from pas gomer to Pasabah B'Kisnin, and it gets downgraded from hamoitzi to mezainos, and from birkas hamazain to brachas machas mein shalosh. But we cannot downgrade it to adama. You know why? Mikam makaim min dagan chashuv ve'ena batal. Because we know the rule as we move through Hilchas Brachas, we're going to see this more and more. The rule is that min dagan, grain, mezainos, cannot be obviated through the mechanics of Iker and Tuffle. You could obviate and eliminate the need for brachas for many foods by Iker and Tuffle. When you eat raisin bran, you don't have to make a bari priya eitz on the raisins, because in raisin bran the cereal is the Iker and the raisins are the Tuffle. So you're not going to make a bari priya eitz, but you cannot do that by mezainos. You can't get rid of mezainos through Iker and Tuffle and say, okay, the potato mixture is the ikar meka adama, and you no longer need the mezainis on the dough. That you can't do. So you could downgrade the dough, which essentially is a regular pas dough. You could downgrade it from hamoitzi and brikas hamazon to mezainis and alamichya. That you could do through the mechanics of Iker and Tuffle. But you cannot get rid of it completely and say, if it's a potato filling, let's make a adama. If it's a fruit filling, let's make a bari priya eitz. If it's a meat filling, a pulled brisket filling, let's make a shahakal. That you can't do. Min dog and choshev ain't a bottle. Ulakach mevarich bari mina mezaynais. And therefore, you're going to make a bari mina mezaynais, upoiter hakoil, and you're going to pater the filling. Once you make the mezainos, you're going to pater the filling with the mezainos. K'moshe isa b'siman reish ches sif beis and gimel. Va'ach yemena oichel ha'isa v'raka perishe b'fnim levad. But if what you do is you cut open the dough pocket and you only eat the fruit filling or the shahakal filling, then mevarach habracha sheyeches la'peris. Then your taka won't make a mezainos. Then your taka only make a bracha on the filling. Because of the Taz writes, let's say you do the opposite. Let's say you cut open the dough pocket, you remove the filling, and you eat only the dough. Now, does it get elevated back to pas gomer because it no longer has the filling? Says the Taz, no. It still gets downgraded to mezainis and not a moitzi. Why? The yeshalad din kisnin, because it's still possible bekisnin. Since it was baked together with the filling, either of fruit or of potatoes or of shahakal or whatever it is. Why? She'ein derech likbaya suda al pas kazu. Because lamaisa now you wouldn't be kaveh suda on this. You're not going to take a potato knish, tear open the knish, take out the potato filling, and now use the dough like pas gomer to be kaveh sudan pas. It's pas ababakistan. It's pastry dough that you ripped off of a pastry, so it's going to remain a mezainos. Now let's do another Mishnah Berurah here, Ois Kat L'Chav Ches, and then let's recap what we've seen so far. Ois Kat L'Chav Ches, the Mechaber said you have this dough pocket, and you fill it with different kinds of ingredients. In the words of the Mechaber, he said you filled it with dvash, honey, ois sukkar, or sugar. Then he says va egoizim, which literally means and walnuts, ushikedim, and almonds, vitavlin, and spices. That's what it means. Literally, says the Mishnah Berurah, that is not the way it is to be understood. Ve'egoizim ushikedim oi ka'amar. He's saying either this or that. It means you filled it either with honey or with sugar or with walnuts or with almonds or with a combination of the above. Now, the Mishnah Berurah says something that is a fascinating phrase that he throws in here. And the depth of the following phrase, I don't think we will fully appreciate until the end of the shir. So I'm going to read it and translate it, and hopefully we'll get back to it a little bit later. The Mishnah Berurah says now, umistabra, and it makes sense, the Mayri, that the Mechaber is discussing a case, gamkein shetam hamiloi nikar beisa, where the taste of the filling is recognizable in the dough. Ukamoisha Messiah L'Basayif, like the Mechaber is going to say on the next explanation of Pasa Babakistan. So what the Mechaber just said over here was the first understanding that we have here in Pasa Babakistan is that Pasa Babakistan is a regular dough made out of flour and water, pas gomor. It's formed into a dough, and then you make a pocket out of it, and you fill it. Once you fill it, and you bake it together with a filling, it is now Pasa Babakistan. The bracha is downgraded from Hamoitzi to Mezainos. The Noch bracha, the bracha Achroina, is downgraded from Birkas Hamazon to bracha Achas Me'ein Shalish. That's the first thing that we see here in the Mechaber. Says the Mishnah Berurah here at the end of Ois Katan Chav Ches that in his eyes, it is mistabra that the Mechaber is talking about a case where the dough, even though it's a regular pas gomer dough, but it is going to absorb taste from the filling. Okay. The other things that we saw here in the Mishnah Berurah, Eis Cotton Chav Zayin, it sounds like the mechanics over here are a shtickle, an Iker and Tuffle mechanics. The mechanics over here are when you make this dough and you go ahead and you fill it with a filling, why are you eating this potato knish? Are you eating this potato knish midin pas? Are you eating this potato knish because the potato knish is the bread of your meal? And you're being kaveh suda on a potato knish? No. You're eating it as a side dish, as a potato side dish. Or if it's a pulled brisket baraka, you're eating it as a meat dish. You're not eating it as a pas dish. And therefore, we don't look at it as pas. And like the Mishnah Berurah said, he said, Ein derech likbaya suda pas kazu. So this is not pas of kviyas suda. This is not hamoitzi and birkas hamazon. This is mezainas and bracha achas mein shalish. And the truth is that if you look at Aruch HaShulchan, in Aruch HaShulchan it's even clearer that way. The Aruch HaShulchan says over here, let me see if I can find it quickly. The Aruch HaShulchan says, where did it go? Yeah, it says like this. Give me 1 second. I'm sorry, I found it before. All right, I'm not finding it right now. He used a lashon that you don't eat it no, I'm not finding it. That you don't eat it to be pas. You b'chlal don't eat it to be pas. You eat it to be, you eat it for the filling. All right. Oh, here it is. V'akavana ba'achilosan, the intent when you eat these pockets is a lahamilui, for the filling. V'loy lahapas atzmai. You're not eating it for pas. You're not eating it for pas. And because you're not eating it for pas, because the ikar is the miloi, that's why the bracha gets downgraded from hamoitzi and birkas hamazon to mezainos and bracha achas me'ein shalosh. So that is the first shot that the Mechaber gives us in Pasa Bekisnין. And again, I want to come back to this last piece that the Mishnah Berurah says that in his eyes, it's mistabra that the Mechaber is talking about a case where the taste of the filling goes into the dough. Now let's jump back into the Mechaber and let's see the second shot. 3 lines off the bottom here on Samach Zayin Amud Aleph, middle of the line, V'yesh Oimrim. Now the Mechaber brings down the Shitas HaRambam. And the Mechaber says like this, V'yesh Oimrim, there are those that say, what's Pasa Bekisnין? Very different. Shehi Isa, this is a dough, She'erev Badvash Oishemen Oichalav, where you mixed into the dough honey or oil or milk, I mean a tavlin or other spices, va'afa'a, and you baked it. V'hu sheyeh tam ta'aroivas hameiperos hayatavlin nicker be'isa. And this means that the taste of either the meiperos, the oil, the eggs, the milk, or the tavlin, or the spices are nicker be'isa. The taste of the additives is in the dough. So what's this second explanation of Pasa Bakistan? Let's take a look here in the Mishnah Berurah. Says the Mishnah Berurah, Ois Katan Chav Tes. The Rambam said we're talking about an isa, a dough, she'erev badvash, where you mixed in these flavorings. Says the Mishnah Chavetz Chaim, that means be'es halisha, when you kneaded the dough. This is not like the first case. In the first case, you had a dough that was mamish, a pas gomor dough. You had a dough that was flour and water. But you made a pocket, you filled it with a filling. In the Rambam's view of Pasa Bakistan is a dough that is a different type of dough. It's a dough where you mixed meiperos, or you mixed flavorings into the dough. You kneaded the dough with these other substances. Says the Chavetz Chaim, be'es halisha, at the time of the kneading, v'hainu afilu haya haroiv mimayim. And according to the Rambam, even if the majority of the liquid in the dough was water and not meiperos, kevan she'iriv ba gamke miminim elu, since you also mixed in these other additives, val yedei zen nishtane hatam, and through those additives the taste of the dough changed, mikri Pasa Bakistan. Now it's called Pasa Bakistan. And the kicker over here was, the way the Mechaber said, V'hu sheyeh tam taroivas hameiperos oyatavlin nicker be'isa. The taste of the additives must be recognizable in the dough. Says the Mishnah Berurah Katan Lamed, nicker be'isa. Says the Chavetz Chaim, di'ilav hachi, because if it's not recognizable in the dough, have a lechem gomor. So then it's pas gomor. What changed? So, what the Mechaber seems to be saying in the name of the Rambam is that in the view of the Rambam, Pasa Bakistan is downgraded from a Hamoitzi and Birkas Hamazon to Mezainos and Bracha Achas Mein Shalosh. Why? Not because of the way you use it, not because of your intent when you eat it, but because it is a different Michael. The nature of the dough is different. Pas gomor is flour and water. That's pas gomor. Or maybe we'll see flour and water with a little salt, maybe an egg, maybe a little sugar, but not where the additives mamish change the flavor of the dough in ganzen. Over here, you're changing the flavor of the dough. You're adding in meiperos, you're adding in spices. Now you have a flavored dough. It's a different animal. That's not pas gomor. You know what that is? That's Pasa Bakistan. Pasa Bakistan is downgraded to a Mezainos and a Bracha Achas Mein Shalosh. Now, says the Chavetz Chaim, something very interesting. The lechem shenoisted by saffron, if you add saffron to bread, lahatimai, to give it a little bit of a taste, ula na'oisai, to make it pretty, saffron makes it yellow, noisted by ma'atzi mukin, or you put in some raisins, lekuli al melechem gomer, who he brings that down from the Pri Megadim. In other words, what the Mishnah Berurah seems to want to do is, he said, wait a second, the Rambam, what are we going to do with this Rambam? This Rambam seems to be saying that if you add anything to the dough, where the taste of that additive is going to be nicker in the dough, you're going to feel it in the dough, now it's Pasa Bakistan, and now it's Mezainos, it's not a moitzi. So how about a raisin challah? You add raisins, is it now Pasa Bakistan? Says the Mishnah Berurah no, and he brings it down from the Pri Megadim. The words of the Pri Megadim, if you look at the Pri Megadim in the Mishpatzos, the Pri Megadim says, Hai lechudei v'hai lechudei. The raisins are not kneaded into the dough. The raisins don't become part of the dough. You could pull the raisins out. Masha'enkein, you add in eggs, you add in apple juice, you add in oil, you add in sugar, you add in cinnamon, you add in honey. that changes the nature of the dough. It's a different dough. You can't pull the honey out of the dough. Saffron is an interesting one. Now, it's very interesting that the Chavetz Chaim added a word that's not in the Pri Megadim by saffron. By saffron, the Pri Megadim does not say lahatimoi. By saffron, the Pri Megadim doesn't say that you added the saffron in order to flavor it. I'm not sure if how much saffron really flavors the dough. If you've ever used saffron, saffron is not like sugar. Saffron is not like cinnamon. When you buy a bottle of saffron, you get a bottle this big, like any other spice bottle that you ever bought, and then when you open it up, you're in for a surprise. You open up the bottle, and down inside the bottom of the bottle, there's a tiny little vial that's about that big. And when you open up that vial, there's 3 or 4 hairs, fibers. That is the saffron. How do you use the saffron? You take the saffron, you soak it in water, and you create saffron water. Has a beautiful rose yellow color. You go ahead, you add that to your dough, it'll make your whole challah yellow. So it gives it a beautiful appearance, and that's what he says over here, lahanoisai. It gives it a beautiful appearance, and it's also aromatic. It gives it more of a fragrance, really, than it does a taste. And maybe that's why also he's saying that the din of saffron over here is different. Now, but let's focus back in on the Rambam. So we have 2 cases over here. So far, we have 2 explanations of Pas Haba'ah Bekisnin, which seem to have 2 very different mechanics that change the halacha structure of the pas. The first case is you have a dough that is a bona fide, genuine pas gomer dough. It's a bread dough. It's flour and water. You went there, you formed it into a pocket, you filled it. You filled it with potatoes. You filled it with pulled brisket. You filled it with blueberries. Whatever. But you filled it with a filling. That's Pas Haba'ah Bekisnin. You're not kaveh sud on pas like that. Also, there's an ikar and tuffle mechanism. Really, the ikar is not the pas. You're not eating it for the pas. You're eating it for the blueberries. You're eating it for the pulled brisket. That's why you're eating it. Really, the ikar is the milui. You can't obviate the pas because it's min dagan. And you can't obviate min dagan through the mechanics of ikar and tuffle. So you got to make a mezainis. You're forced to make a mezainis. But hamaitzi and brechas hamazon? No, it's not going to be hamaitzi and brechas hamazon. Ikar and tuffle, the reason you're eating it. So it's not hamaitzi and brechas hamazon. You're not kaveh sud on it. It's mezainis and bracha rachs meit shalish. That's the Rabbeinu Chananel, the Aruch, the Rashba, the Tur. Now we have the Rambam. The Rambam is that Pas Haba'ah Bekisnin is a different animal. It's not pas. It's not pas. Pas is flour and water. This is flour, oil, eggs, sugar, cinnamon, honey, flavorings, different animal. It's not pas. It's not pas gomer. This is Pas Haba'ah Bekisnin. Pas Haba'ah Bekisnin is a different food. The nature of the dough is a different nature. And therefore, it gets downgraded to a mezainis and a bracha achas bein shalish. Now let's go to the Ramah for number 3. Says the Ramah, 2 lines off the bottom end of the line. V'yesh omrim, there are those that say, shezen nikra pas gomer. There are those who look at the case of the Rambam and they say, that's a different animal? Why is that a different animal? That's pas. It's flavored pas. But it's pas. It's a raisin challah. It's a chocolate chip challah. So okay, so now you have a honey cinnamon challah, or you have a spicy challah, or you have a saffron challah, or you have a savory challah. But it's challah. There are those that say that this is pas gomer. Ela in ken yesh behem harbe tavlin oy dvash, unless you put in a lot of spices or a lot of honey, kimine misika, like the sweets, shekoirin lekach, like the sweets that are already called cake. Shekema'at advash v'atavlin heim ikar, where now already you're talking about a food where the honey, where the spices is the ikar. So what would this be reminiscent of? Kokosh. If you make a kokosh, so the Ramah says, let's compare 2 cases over here. Let's compare one case where you make an egg challah, and maybe besides the egg, you put in some oil, maybe you put in some cinnamon, you definitely put in sugar, and you make a sweet challah. There are some people who eat homemade challah, and they say, wow, that's so sweet, it's like cake. Can I have another slice of that cake? So it's a flavored challah. Then you have a kokosh. A kokosh is a yeast dough. A lot of that dough, it could be, you have doughs that are very, very much a pasto. But why are you eating it? Are you eating it to eat bread? No, you're eating it to eat chocolate. It's a chocolate kokosh. You're eating a big, thick, rich, chocolatey kokosh. The layers of the dough are pounded and rolled so thin, they're like paper thin, and it's chock full of chocolate. That, the Ramah says, that's pasaba bekistin. Says the Ramah, the Rambam's pasaba bekistin? Some differ with the Rambam. Some say, I'm sorry, that's flavored challah, but it's challah. It's pas. You got to make a mitzi on it. You got to make brikas hamazon on it. Pasaba bekistin. Pasaba bekistin is where the additives, the sweets, the flavorings are so plentiful that they take over the dogon. They take over the kemach. They take over the isa. When you eat one of those kokoshes with the paper-thin dough, what are you tasting more? Are you tasting more chocolate or are you tasting more dough? You're tasting more chocolate. So, okay, over there you've taken over the isa. You've taken over the dough with the chocolate. That's pasaba bekistin. Let's see the Mishnah Berurah. Says the Mishnah Berurah back on Samach Zayin Lamed Aleph. Shezeh nikra. There are those that say that the Rambam's case, Hainu heicha de erev ba bahalisha, where you added in when you needed the dough, rak ma'at dvash v'cholav, a little honey, a little milk, eine bottle shein pas makma shenirga shatam. According to the Rambam, once you could taste the flavorings, it's no longer pas gomer. Now it's pasaba bekistin. Says the Ramah, there are those that say that if you add in a relatively small amount of flavorings, that doesn't take the designation of lechem off of the pas. That's still pas gomer. And you got to make hamaitzi and brikas hamazon. Oiskad lamed beis, pas gomer. That's pas gomer. Umavarch hamaitzi l'kol shu, you would make hamaitzi even on a tiny bit. V'chein brikas hamazon kazayis kedin pas. And if you ate a kazayis, you would have to say brikas hamazon. You'd have to bench, like you do by regular pas gomer. What's pasaba bekistin, says the Ramah? Oiskad lamed gimel. Harbe tavlin. Oidvash. If you put in a lot of spices or honey, Ritzayna loymar, what the Ramah means to say when he says a lot, shekol kach tavlin mu'uriv behen, where there's so much flavoring and spices mixed in with the dough, adjal yedezeh yeminkar tavlin betam yoisame akemach, where the flavoring of the additives is more than the flour. You're tasting chocolate. You eat a good piece of kokosh, you're eating chocolate. You have texture of the dough. You have body from the dough. But you're eating chocolate. That's what you're tasting. You're tasting chocolate. You're not tasting kamach. V'chein b'dvash v'shemen v'cholav. So too if you're adding honey, oil, milk. Be'inon sheyeharoiv mehen u'miot mayim. The Ramah is talking about where you're making a dough and the liquids are honey, oil, milk, eggs, let's say. And that's more than the water. To the extent with the meiperos that you use, that's what you're tasting more than you're tasting kamach and dough. And now, says the Mishnah Berurah, v'chein b'tzir arishain, and so too in the first case that we discussed today, the pasto that's formed into a pocket. We're talking about shemimalin v'chemetzir reaches shekazar shekadav shemimalin mehen, but inon gamkein we also need it to be sheyi'amilu yaharbe kolkach, where there's so much filling in that knish or in that baraka, ad shal yidezeh yenirgash hatam harbe ma'oid, where the taste is really the ikar. What we seem to be getting over here in the Mechaber and the Ramah, to the way I'm understanding it is, we have three different cases over here. One of them, the first one, is different than the other two. In the first case, the dough is a real bona fide pasto. It's dough made out of flour and water. So by virtue of what does it become downgraded to a mezainis and a brachas ba'mein chalish instead of hamaitzi brachas hamazon? It's because you made a filling, and like the Mishnah Berurah just said, there's so much filling that the filling is the ikr. So what he says over here, he says, "Sheyamilu yaharbe kol kach." There's so much filling. Achal yedei nirgash atam harbe ma'od. When you eat that baraka, when you eat that potato knish, you're tasting the potatoes and the onions and the salt and the black pepper. Yeah, there's a bite from the dough, but it's not the taste of the dough that you're eating. You're eating the taste of the potatoes. You're eating the taste of the pulled brisket and the gravy. You're eating the taste, if it's a cheese calzone, you're eating the taste of the cheese and the onions and the peppers and the mushrooms and the tomato sauce, not the dough. And therefore, even though the dough essentially is a pas dough, it's a tuffle. It's a tuffle over here. You have to make a mezainis on it because you can't erase mine dagon when it comes to a bracha shaila. Through ikr and tuffle, you can't erase mine dagon, so you got to make a mezainis. Not only do you have to make a mezainis, but this is a case where the mezainis on the tuffle is going to pater the ikr. It's going to pater the filling, which is really the ikr. But it's really a mechanism of ikr and tuffle. And the fact that you're not kaveh sud on this, because you're not eating it mitaras pas. That's why the bracha gets downgraded to mezainis and bracha achas me'en shalish. That's the first case. The second two cases, the Rambam and the Ramah. The Rambam says that pasa בכיסנין is a dough that was kneaded with flavoring additives. And as long as the flavoring of the additives is a nicker in the pas, it becomes a different min. It's not pas gomer, it's pasa בכיסנין. Flavored bread, according to the Rambam, is not pas gomer. It's pasa בכיסנין. And therefore, it gets a different bracha. It gets mezainis and bracha achas me'en shalish. The Ramah says, what? Just because it's a little bit flavored, it loses the designation of pas? Can't be. Says the Ramah, yes, you're right. What's different about pasa בכיסנין and pas gomer is that pasa בכיסנין is a dough that's flavored. But the point of difference between the Ramah and the Rambam is that the Ramah is saying that the flavoring of the dough has to be so powerful and so strong that it erases the tam of the dough. It has to be so present, it has to be so powerful, it has to be so much that it makes the bread lose the designation of bread because it's just not pas anymore. You're not eating it for tam of the isa. You're not eating it for the tam of the dough, for the tam of the kamach, of the flour. You're eating kokos, you're eating chocolate, you're eating cinnamon, you're eating cheese. That's what makes pasa בכיסנין, says the Ramah. But the mechanics of the Rambam and the mechanics of the Ramah seem to be the same mechanics, which are different than the mechanics of the first scenario. Over here, the mechanics are not an ikr and tuffle mechanics. It's not. The mechanics over here are, this is a different animal. This is not pas. In the first case, it is pas. In the second case, pasa בכיסנין is not pas. It's pasa בכיסנין, which is a different animal. Okay, we're going to stop over here. Now, the one thing that I did want to mention, which I said I would get back to at the end of this year, is that for some reason, the Chavetz Chaim seems to want to add a little bit of the mechanics of the Ramah and the Rambam into the Rabbeinu Chananel, the Aruch, the Torah, and the Rashba. And that's why the Mishnah Berurah says, even in the first case, where you have a pas with a filling, it must be that the taste of the filling is in the dough. It sounds like the Chavetz Chaim is not happy with the idea that if there's absolutely no change to the dough, it loses its designation as pas. Yes, it's true, the filling is the ikr. Yes, it's true, you're not kaveh suda on pas like this. Yes, it's true, you're not eating it with tars pas. You're eating it for the blueberry filling. But if the bottom line is that the dough is a pas dough, how does it lose the designation of pas gomer? Must be that the taste of the filling at least goes into the dough a little bit. That's what the Chavetz Chaim seems to want to say. In the Aruch HaShulchan, I don't see that at all. The Aruch HaShulchan makes no mention of that at all, and the Aruch HaShulchan says straight out that this is like an Iker and Tuffle type thing. It's not why you're eating it. You're not eating this for pas. You're eating this for the filling. And that's why it gets downgraded to a mezainis and a bracha achas me'en shalosh. Okay, the schus of our learning should be a schus for Achenim Kol Beis Yisrael and the student Batzar Bashivya Ha'imdim Bein Bayam Ubein Bayabasha Hamakayim Yerachem Aleihem V'Yotziim Mitzar L'Rvacha Me'afela La'Oru Mishibid L'Geula Hashta Bagalos Van Kariv Marmain. The schus of limud HaTorah should be Megan and Gans Klal Yisrael and Roshim should send Yeshua's Refuas Panasit Sheduchim Tol as need. We should be zeichet to see the Geula Shlema with the Bias Gael Tzedek B'Mehera V'Yameinu Amen. Be well.